So let's begin now talking about what started to go wrong at Athens as a result of the enormous setback they suffered in 418 BC with the Battle of Mantinea, as we covered in our last video. So one of the unfortunate things for the Athenians was to recognize that they weren't really the superpowers that Pericles had built them up. After Pericles' death, and then also after Cleon's death, new leaders had appeared in Athens. We now have this fellow Alcibiades, whom you were introduced to with the Battle of Delium. He was the one that was saved by the philosopher Socrates. And of course, you also have Nicias, who was the architect of the peace. And then we have this guy, Hyperbolus. Now, Alcibiades was from a fairly progressive background, and he was the most aggressively minded of the politicians, wanting maybe not quite as headstrong as Cleon, but wanting the Athenians to take fairly aggressive power-based stances in the Greek world. Nicias was much more conservative and wanted the Athenians as much as possible to maintain what they had. So Nicias would have been a little bit closer to what Pericles would have called for. And Hyperbolus, recognizing that these two, Nicias and Alcibiades, were essentially at odds with each other, was hoping to play off the two against each other so that he could rise to power himself. Actually, Hyperbolus was probably the closest to another Cleon. He was one who also wanted to foment a fairly aggressive war policy, but in his case, it was much more apparently to foster his own interest in where he wanted Athens to go to, rather than a larger picture for Athens as a whole. So Hyperbolus, who was rather similar to Cleon, by the way, and you can see how the darkness falls on Hyperbolus, which is rather appropriate because Hyperbolus was a businessman very similar to Cleon. Cleon had made his way as a leather tanner, as we know from Aristophanes, the comic playwright, who spoke about how much the leather stunk when it was being manufactured. Hyperbolus was a lamp maker. But now, Hyperbolus, therefore, was one of these super aggressive businessman types. And as I say, he wanted to figure out which of these two politicians, Nicias or Alcibiades, was the more potent one, so that he could join on that side. So when there was a stalemate between these two, Nicias and Alcibiades, as how to progress with Athenian politics because of the setback at Mantinea, Hyperbolus stepped forward to the assembly and did what had not been proposed now for a few decades, which was an ostracism. This, remember, had not been used since the days of Themistocles and Cimon and such. And so now he brought it back, wanting to have one of these two become the target of the ostracism. The Athenians agreed, and the conditions were set forth for carrying out the ostracism. Nicias and Alcibiades both immediately realized what Hyperbolus was after, and the two of them temporarily put aside their differences and hatched a plan. On the day of the ostracism, the votes were cast on the shards of pottery. They were all counted up, and when they were all finished, the winner/loser was Hyperbolus. Nicias and Alcibiades had managed to get all of their cronies together to vote for Hyperbolus together, and so he was the one who ended up ostracized. His ostracism was the very last one ever carried out in Athenian politics because it was now recognized how venal the whole process was. However, this was unfortunate in the sense that the political stalemate already in place between Nicias and Alcibiades simply continued. Now, Alcibiades would live quite a few years longer. Nicias, as it turns out, only has a relatively short period of time to live, and he is the next one who will disappear from the scene. The run-up for that is coming up in our next video, and in videos to come, we will explain how Athenian politics goes from bad to worse. We'll see you soon in the next video.